transition. Today, we have an event focused on research and innovation for climate neutrality in the case of small islands. And I'm so happy to welcome our guest speaker, Alexandros Charalambides. Welcome, Alexander.
Hi, Tatiana. Thank you for having me.
Alexander is an associate professor at the Cyprus University of Technology, working primarily on solar systems and also on innovation and entrepreneurship for decarbonization. He has PhD in mechanical engineering from Imperial College of London. He served on the board of International Solar Energy Society, and from 2024 he also serves on the board of Electricity Authority of Cyprus. And last but not least, he is also the founder of Chrysalis LEAP, which is the first cleantech accelerator in Cyprus. Quite successful, I would say. And he has trained several hundred entrepreneurs, and he helped them to go from a research idea to a real viable business. So Alexandros is engaged in huge variety of different research projects on EU level, on national level, and with private funding sources, focusing on various aspects of sustainable development and entrepreneurship. But today we are focusing specifically on the small islands. So Alexandros, I will start with a very simple question. What is unique about small islands? What are the specific challenges these islands face in achieving carbon neutrality compared to larger countries?
Thank you, Tatiana, for the introduction and the question. Just one clarification. When we're talking about small islands, we are not so much focusing on these small, like 100 habitats, 500 inhabitants, 1,000 inhabitants, small islands that are either based solely on agriculture or maybe like touristic islands. We're talking more of islands like Cyprus, like Malta, like Sardinia in Europe, but also Okinawa in Japan or Hawaii in the US. So they're big islands. Some of them are state countries. So they have everything from industry to policy, government office, but also tourist and agriculture. So we're talking for big, small islands, if I can call them like that.
Okay.
And what's different with them than mainland Europe, mainland Asia, and so on is that, for example, in the case of Cyprus, in case some of the audience don't know exactly where Cyprus is, it's a small island in Mediterranean. It's, south of Turkey, north of Egypt. So it's on that part of the world. It is completely isolated. So electricity has to be produced locally. You cannot import electricity. These kind of islands usually don't have a heavy industry. We don't have a steel manufacturing company or huge cement or anything like that, just because the cost of transferring all the goods to these islands is quite high. In the case of Cyprus as well, it's that we rely on oil. Yes, now with the developments of storage and photovoltaics, this share of renewable is increasing. However, these islands still face a big problem when we're talking about small isolated islands, is that you cannot export your energy. You cannot import your energy. So the idea about these small islands is that it's unique, not only on the energy part that we're discussing today, but you can extrapolate that in everything where these kind of isolated ecosystems.
So, Alexandros, here I see some controversy, which was always puzzling me. In electricity, we have such a wording like island regime, which means that energy system is functioning in completely isolated mode, like an island. And here we are talking about real islands, which are completely isolated from the rest of the world. And you would expect in this case that they should be like leaders in the implementation of distributed energy sources, in electricity storage advancement, because they are so much dependent on what they are producing locally. Yeah, so they should be far in front of this progress. Yeah, nevertheless, I'm talking not only about Cyprus. I saw absolutely the same situation in Hawaii and the same discussion. Yeah, they are also very, very much dependent on very expensive imported fossil fuels, primarily fuel oil, which is the most expensive, the most dirty. Yeah, but nevertheless, they still do it. And many of the Greek islands, the same situation. I don't know the energy balance of Malta, but I suspect that it's not far from
More
that.
or less the same, like
Yeah.
Cyprus.
So what's the reason? All of these islands that we are talking about right now, it's not like Norwegian islands in the Northern Sea with a
Yeah,
low insolation. These are all located in the areas with the climate which is extremely favorable for solar. They have also some wind potential simply because they are islands and there is always some breeze from the
exactly.
sea. So why? Why are they behind in energy transitioning?
That's It's a very great question. It's a mixture of opportunities and also challenges, which is why the case of islands is unique. So I totally agree with you. The Cyprus has 300 days of sunshine, so it should have been a leader in photovoltaics and so on, but we don't have the industry. So you cannot become a leader if you don't have the industry. So how do you develop that leadership in an industry? And you can only do it through research and innovation, because we don't have the material to do it. We cannot compete with any big country in manufacturing cost. Another of the problems of Cyprus and other islands is that in 300 days, we only need 600 megawatt of energy, which is very low. Yesterday, we needed 1,300 megawatt. So that's double. So how do you accommodate for a system? You cannot go 1,300 megawatts, for example, and only use it for 10 days during the year. But if you stay at 600 megawatt, which might be 90% of your days, you will never become carbon neutral. Why now you didn't do anything about it? It's twofold. One of them, it's not in the culture of this kind of islands to focus on research and innovation. We don't have universities dating from the 1400s, 1500s. We don't have it's not in our blood, let's say, to become academics. That's only something recently that's happening. A lot of people will focus on agriculture, they will focus on tourism, they will focus on services, and they will service either the local industry or through Cyprus and through countries focus on an area. And this is what we wanted to solve, is how can we improve this pool of researchers so that they can solve this problem? Because these problems, as you said, they are unique. Germany doesn't have, like, if I go a step back, for example, there are days in Cyprus where we throw away 80% of the energy produced from photovoltaics because it cannot go in the grid. This case is not in the case of the US, of Germany, or any other big country. So their researchers don't even focus on these problems because it's not a problem. It's a small problem of a small country. And this is what we've been working on. How can we improve the quality of the researchers in Cyprus? How can we increase the quantity of them? How can we focus on these problems and opportunities that only small islands have?
So, if we started to talk about it, maybe you could describe how exactly you are facing these constraints and maybe lack of the historical background in research and innovation. So, how to change this picture? And frankly, I expect that it's not the case only of the small islands. Many countries in the world, they do not have universities founded in 14th century and like new college which was built in 13th century compared to the old college built in 11th century.
Exactly. Well, the problem, it didn't completely became apparent to us. We started the accelerator, the cleantech accelerator, as you said, Chrysalis LEAP, about 12 years ago. Back then, there was no innovation in Cyprus. There was no, the economy was going down, as you know, the whole world was in a crisis about 15 years ago. So when we started it, we had loads of low-hanging fruit. So we had many startups, high-quality hardware, software, extremely talented people. After a few years, though, when the economy started going better, when there were other opportunities, it kind of dried out. And that's when we thought, okay, what can we do? And to do that, the first thing we did was actually we studied every single island, well, almost every single island in the world to see what are they doing? What is Hawaii doing? What is Okinawa doing? What is Sardinia? And so on. The second thing we did was to map what is actually present in Cyprus. Because you might say that, okay, I know the problem is smart grid integration, I'm calling like that, or is drones in agriculture. That's the biggest problem in Cyprus. I'm just giving an example. Do you have any research in that field? Do you have any grants? Do you have any startups? Do you have any researchers working on it? Do you have an industry working on it? So a lot of people focus on an area without actually realizing or mapping, do you have the local resources to start building on it? So that's the second thing we did. The third thing we actually did was co-develop some action plans to be able to implement specific actions in Cyprus. Again, when the government decides, I will use drones in agriculture for the whole of the discussion today, just as an example, to say that I will focus on that. I will do a strategy on drones in agriculture. And you don't speak with anyone from the Agricultural Institute, if you don't speak with anyone from the Ministry of Environment, if you don't understand what targets do you have in that industry, no one will follow that action because no one has any skin in the game. And that's actually what happened in Cyprus. In all European countries, we have what is called the National Energy and Climate Plan, NECP. And in this plan, every country has to say how I'm going to achieve my targets for energy and climate. I have this, 20% saving in CO2, so much penetration of renewable, and so on. We did that a few years ago in Cyprus, and they never talked, the relevant ministry that did the NSAP never sat down to talk with everyone who's engaged. They didn't speak with the water authority. They didn't speak with the universities. It was very superficial stakeholder engagement.
But why? Why so? I mean, in the islands, normally, at least this is my personal observation, especially in the islands which are not that big, people know each other. Yeah, all these informal relations are very strong. Everybody is someone's cousin or I don't know, so relatives, friends, schoolmates, whatever. So it's much more easy to talk to people. It's not like 7 handshakes, it's maybe 2 handshakes away from any person. And normally in this island system, people are very good in balancing interests because you have to live in a small piece of land forever with your neighbor, and you prefer to find mutually acceptable solutions, some sort of compromises. So this strategy not to discuss, it's really very strange. Why did it happen?
Twofold. One, it's because we're quite small. Even though I agree with what you said, everyone knows everyone. If you are in charge of doing the NSAP, and at the same time, because you're working in a small ministry, you also have to do X and Y and Z, you don't have the time to leave your office and go and have 30 meetings and dive into the problem of each one and actually ask them, what is the problem? Why haven't you solved this problem? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the barriers in solving this problem? It's easy to have a meeting. It's hard to arrange the meeting and actually have time to do all of that. And that was actually one of the hard problems we also had to do. Is it took us a lot of time to meet with everyone and discuss with everyone and put it down on paper. The second thing is that it's a lot easier when you say you make a plan not to actually have a plan, but mostly a list of legislations, a list of targets, and a list of stakeholders, but you don't have actually the route to do so. For example, you said, oh, I want to save 20% of energy in buildings. What I will do is I will retrofit 50% of the building stock. That's easy to write, but how actually can you actually implement it? Who gets involved? When? Who is the champion to push for it? When do you actually do this? Do you have enough retrofitters to do so? It takes time, and unfortunately, it's not something negative about the employees. It's something negative about the vast work that small countries can do. Like in Germany, you might have 100 people in the ministry. Everyone can do one small part. In Cyprus, there are 3 employees, and they still have to do all of that work. And so, yeah, that was a problem. That's what the last thing we did was actually do specific small actions that can actually be implemented in Cyprus, only in research and innovation, only in climate. And the reason we did them small and more like concrete is because, for example, one of the problems that came out from everyone is what we said, how do you educate people? We have ideas, but there is absolutely no way that I or my team or some researchers can go to the Ministry of Education, not in Cyprus, any Ministry of Education, and tell them you need to change your curriculum so that we can improve research and innovation, so that we can achieve our national energy and climate plans. We know that, but it's out of our, let's say, magnitude. It's too big for us. We cannot do that. So we focus on smaller actions that are more concrete and easily applicable.
It's very interesting. So if I understand correctly, it means, at least in case of Cyprus, and I will ask the audience to react. I see people from Malta, from Singapore. So what is your experience in your countries, in your islands? So at least in the case of Cyprus, resources in the small islands, well, big small islands, as you've mentioned, they are so limited that there is no capacity available to make this stakeholder mapping and engagement exercise. So, but unless
to the
you
level that you're
really
supposed to
engage
do and the
them.
level, yes.
Mm-hmm.
For example,
So,
let me give you a relevant, not an indirect example. Cyprus was the leader in solar heaters. Solar heater is basically to heat up your water to have a shower in the house from the sun. 99.9999% of houses have these solar heaters. We were the leaders. When Europe started discussing about this and having to do, how do you call it, like a standardization of how you design them, and they had meetings at EU level, you will have 10 lobby groups from Germany pushing for their design, 10 lobby groups from the UK. From Cyprus and Greece, there was one person representing both countries going there half the time, just because you don't have the resources to be engaged in the daily activities. So automatically then, the bigger countries dictated the standardization of solar heaters. So it's the same kind of example applicable here. You don't have the time to go deep, to investigate everything. We tried to do it as well. I'm not saying that we did better work than the government, obviously, but we tried to go a bit more deeper and understand. And it was co-design workshops. We invited everyone. Lots of post-its, nothing online. I hate online exercises and so on.
Okay, so I think it's really important point to stress that stakeholder analysis mapping that you did and engagement, it's really very important in this case, but also I assume like a special focus on resource allocation, which the governments should do, because in case of innovation, I mean, it's difficult to expect that innovation will happen by itself without any funding and support.
Yeah. And exactly, and you cannot, one of the things that came out of the workshops again was that carbon capture is very important. which it is very important. Are there any researchers in Cyprus working on that? No. Are there any funded projects on that? No. Is there an industry to help on that? No. So we kind of excluded that, and we focus on things that became apparent that you could also work on them. For example, one of them, as you said, is the smart grids. Anything to do with smart grids, storage, software for better prediction of renewable integration, better management system of the energy flow, anything on that. Yes, we have lots of researchers in Cyprus. Do we need more? Of course. So we need to see, how do I increase the research and the innovation in that part? The other part was urban planning. Cyprus, for example, and other islands, as I said, we're built, for example, like Los Angeles. We are houses everywhere without any urban planning. So we cannot do easily a tram, we cannot do a train, we cannot have bicycle lanes to the extent that big European countries have. So in Cyprus, urban planning is completely different from urban planning with big metropolitan cities. So that was another thing we found we need to focus. Agriculture in the sense of small farmers in arid regions. Again, you go in the US, a farm is bigger than Cyprus. There you have completely different automation, different climate. In Cyprus, you have no water, arid land, small farmers. So what can you do research on that part? And the fourth thing was a bit of on the circularity in the building industry. Again, because you produce a lot of waste from the buildings, what are you going to do with them? So these are the 4 areas that came out from Cyprus. And the urban planning and the smart grids was actually the same problems that came out from the same analysis that Malta did as well. So, and the circularity in building, sorry. So 3 out of the 4 was the same in both Cyprus and Malta.
And I would expect with the other big, small islands, which we've mentioned, it should be quite similar. So I assume there are many similarities in the challenges and solutions for the islands. And there should be probably some cooperation between them. I mean, if each one alone doesn't have enough resources to deal with this problem, maybe together we can handle it in a better way.
I was for a conference in Okinawa last year, and I met all the stakeholders there, and all that came out, it was like I was talking with Cypriots. They are 4 hours away by plane from mainland Japan. They don't have a heavy industry. They rely on oil. Yes, the weather is a bit different, but they rely on agriculture. They rely on tourism. They do have 2 universities. One of them is the new one, the Okinawa Institute of Science Technology, which is the one where I visited them. And that was one of the actions they were doing to, to attract foreign talents. No, it wasn't in the mentality to do research and innovation. They all have cars as well because they're non-densely populated throughout the island. So they don't have it's not feasible to have trains or trams connecting the cities. So the electricity cannot do renewable as much, again, because of typhoon or curtailment, which is the loss of renewable because the grid cannot take it. It was the same. It was like talking to Cypriots.
So
in another language.
You mentioned already several areas where you've decided to focus with innovation and research. So can you probably tell a bit more what is happening right now? So what kind of innovative renewable energy projects are currently being implemented in Cyprus, maybe in Malta as well?
Okay, yes. Well, research-wise, there are a lot of small groups, and that's one of the things we wanted to solve is how do we bring everything together and attract more talent. But when we're talking about research, for example, in the renewable and agriculture, there is research, for example, On one of them, for example, is on how do you do communities, energy communities? How do you finance and bring together people that might have a rooftop for photovoltaic? Someone has a swimming pool, like for the community, the rooftop of a school, someone doing, lots of houses together, or a hotel or a hospital. How do you bring everything together so that you can form energy communities and reduce the waste of energy? We have others that they're combining solar energy and photovoltaics and agriculture so that you can reduce the intense heat and the water evaporation from arable land by using the right kind of photovoltaics. We have research, for example, to make, there is another industry, he's like a startup going to SME now. He's embedding nanoparticles in carbon fibers so that he can make structures that are a bit lighter, but at the same time better when they will be decommissioned. What other research we have? We have another startup that they're producing hydrogen from seawater so that the hydrogen can be co-combusted in boilers, in hotels, for the cleaning of the towels and the sheets, or even for the production of milk in dairy farms and so on. And they're actually producing these devices, these hydrogen devices. So always consider small ones of Cypriots working on it, but they're all kind of struggling. I have demonstrated that my technology works at the lab scale or at the pre-commercial client / collaborator / tester, but none of them have achieved this size of I can actually start producing and selling at a big scale.
Yeah, exactly. That was my next question. So, startups, okay, they are evolving, they are growing. Some of them are very promising. People are inspired, but making the next step to scale up. Yeah, small islands by definition have small market. Yeah, so you cannot justify any investment which will be focused just on supplying, let's say, any equipment or any technology to the local market alone. So, how strong is the link in this R&D and then market access between the islands? And between the islands and, let's say, mainland. So, for example, in the case of Cyprus or Malta, how strong is this exchange of information and possibility for the island startups to enter the broader, the bigger European market?
Not so much, unfortunately. And this is two of the actions we kind of mapped, focus on. Basically, we identified 4 different actions. 2 of them has to do with data and collaboration. 2 of them have to do with piloting and enabling. So, to answer your question, no, it's not very easy to escape, if I can do it like that, the island and test it somewhere else. In order for you to do that, you need to pilot it at commercial, it's called FOAK, F-O-A-K, first of a kind. No one will be convinced or, let's say, trust a startup from Cyprus that what they did in a small demo in Cyprus will actually work in a big country. So one of the actions we want to do is actually this kind of demonstration where, let's say on smart grids, you can bring your technology to Cyprus, either the Cypriot companies or someone from abroad, so that we can attract more. You can actually test it on the grid of Cyprus, because the grid of Cyprus is quite small, so it's easy to test something. And as you said, everyone knows everyone, so it's good, then you get everyone permission. It's not like you're doing something illegal, but you can test it, and then you get validated results from a government authority. So if I have, for example, the hydrogen unit, as I said, if I can combine it with one of the power units of the power combustion units of the Electricity Authority of Cyprus, and I have some data that's validated by the Electricity Authority or the regulator, then automatically the startup can use that data to go and test it elsewhere. And it's the same way, for example, we had a French company doing solar photovoltaics. They wanted to come to Cyprus to test their technology for solar photovoltaics. Again, much easier in a small, isolated country to come, connect, test, and have a seal of approval that it's working. And indirectly for the government, for the country, you attract people to come here to test it. Some of them might stay and register their company. If it's not very heavy industry related, they could even start their production here. Cyprus will gain some experience. The students will see that they can go and do an internship there and so on. You want to ask something or shall I?
Just to rephrase, so it means that potentially Cyprus could become like a tech lab test bed, for the European startups, at least those somehow related to solar, because where else would you find such an insulation level?
Exactly.
And then it's also so the risks and the barriers for testing seem to be much lower here. But with the next step, so okay, they've tested. They've
in real conditions.
in
Yes.
real conditions, the technology is working, everything is fine. They are moving like back to the mainland, you said so potentially Cyprus could be a place for the technology production for this scaling up. And in this respect, are there enough like industrial facilities for equipment manufacturing? What about the trained labor force? You need like qualified workers to produce it. So is it in place or should it also be developed?
That's why we targeted some areas. So in some area, yes, there are people that can help you. In some other things, no, we're not big enough to do all of them. That's why it's important to find the areas where you would like to focus. You can't do everything. Yes, it would be good to be able to do everything, but for example, we cannot become a test bed of health industry. You cannot, you understand what I'm saying is that you need to focus. And yes, solar is something that you can do. You can manufacture stuff here. You have some factories, so it's doable. Now, if someone wants to do chip design and manufacture chips, for like, not chips to it, the chip design, no, you cannot manufacture it here. And so on. Another one of the problems is what's called the regulatory sandbox. When we brought this French company, for example, as I said, with the floating photovoltaics, we didn't have the process of how do you do the testing, the test bed. But even before that, they came to Cyprus. I want to find a client. They did find a client. But the client said, I cannot trust you yet for a 10 megawatt project, for a 50 megawatt project. Can we do a small 10 kilowatt project? Here's our land. Let's test it. And if we like it, we will give you the money and proceed with a full installation. When we started talking with all the relevant authorities in Cyprus, and again, it's the same everywhere, I need to do an environmental study. The cost to do an environmental for 10 kilowatt is the same as 10 megawatt. I want you to have this, the building permit. The cost to do the building permit and the time for a 10 kilowatt project was the same as a 10 megawatt project. I want you to get the approval of the regulatory authority. To do a test for 10 kilowatt for 3 months was the same as 10 months. So automatically they couldn't cope and they left. And I don't blame them. And this is where regulatory sandboxes come in place, where the government decides, I want to do a regulatory sandbox on solar photovoltaic, on floating photovoltaics. I bring all the stakeholders together. We agree on the plan. We give some exceptions in some of the regulations for a limited amount of time. And then you disassemble everything. And if you think you can find an investor, then you can get and do, then you have to do the whole process, environmental study, permit studies, and so on. But the regulatory sandbox enabling this faster demonstration of a technology. And they do that a lot in mainland Europe, especially UK, when it comes to financial modeling and stuff like that. On clean tech, I haven't seen many countries doing sandboxes in clean tech.
But what do you think? Is there a probability that Cyprus authorities or any other island authorities are looking and moving in this direction? So, can we hope?
In the case of Malta, for example, they are very interested in the results of our project that we worked with Malta on this, and they're actually trying to find funds to actually do these things. In the case of Cyprus, in some things I'm not very optimistic. I'm not very optimistic. But on the other hand, for example, the regulatory authority has a special permit process to test things. But this is one permit out of the 20 you need. So unless the other 19 are aligned to make things streamlined, it's, as we say in Greek, it's doro adoro. So it's a gift that's not a gift.
It means that actually the island, which will be the first mover in becoming like a test bed, will have a huge advantage. I think Singapore, for a period of time, was, or maybe still is, trying to do it, and with so they've established like a special testing island for all the new systems. Was it successful? Do you know anything about it? And
No.
do you cooperate or interact with them?
Not with, let me just find the name. I am not with Singapore, but with Hawaii. I know they did I always forget the name. I think it's Elemental Accelerator, which it's the way that Hawaii is doing what we have discussed as well. They're actually giving funds, the government giving funds for new technologies from anywhere in the world to go and actually be incubated in Hawaii and actually start demonstrating and applying it there. So Hawaii has a very good example on that.
And what about the European Union as a whole? So I would expect that in the framework of these Horizon Life grants, there are enormous funds allocated. There are special programs on like EU islands and so on. Do they talk about like targeted innovation? What is happening there?
Yes, they do have calls that are targeted not only small islands, but also sometimes they call it the remote areas. Because, if you're a small town in the middle of, the mainland Germany, and you're not Berlin, you're not Frankfurt, you still have similar problems. So there are calls targeted for islands or remote areas. The problem with these funds is that they're very competitive. So you only have, let's say, 5%, 2% chance of getting funded. So it's a lot of work and there are lots of islands. So the competition is quite fierce. And as you said, the first one that will start doing it in Europe and start to attract startups and researchers to actually test a lot of those things will become, the leader in that. But again, you need to decide where you want to do.
Mm-hmm. And okay, this remains as a big question mark. We do not know how it will evolve, but at least we understand that this is something important to think about, to focus on the technology side. Yeah, on these like technological gaps. So, what do you think are the most urgent issues for these small islands to address in a general way? So, we've discussed what Cyprus is looking at, like these four topics, but is there something really universal for like the majority of islands?
Majority, I wouldn't say, but I think one of the biggest problem I've seen that it's common in everything is the seasonality in the usage of energy, because most islands are usually touristic islands, so they don't have a heavy industry. So yeah, that something common. Not the islands don't have a heavy industry, so it's quite different how to your energy mix is different, your resources is different, and so on. Agriculture and the problems of agriculture are common between all islands as well. Like we in Okinawa, they have an aging population in agriculture. So the young people are not interested in agriculture and they go to mainland Japan. In Cyprus, again, agriculture is not something, it's small families. It's not something you get in France or in Germany or the US and so on. And the other thing that's common, I think, is this seasonality in the energy mix. The energy you need in the winter time is completely different than the energy you need in the summer. So, that kind of dictates what people can focus on. Now, the weather is obviously different. The weather in Hawaii is different than the weather in Cyprus. So it's not like they have a water problem and they need to do research on water. We need that. But at the same time, Israel has the same problem with water. And because they had a more serious problem for longer, they are so much advanced in solutions in water on what can we do in arid regions and with water management and with agriculture management. It's very hard for Cyprus now to compete with Israel on the research level. That's why it can become a test bed for Israeli companies that they want to test things under European legislation in the European market and make it easier for them to start exporting in Europe, if that's their business model, obviously.
Hmm. Yes, sounds very logical. And if we look at the, let's say, one question, one argument which I hear quite frequently from the policymakers in the islands, they're saying, look, of course, so we love all your green technologies and new energies, but we are in a very specific position. You have to understand we have energy security problems. We cannot rely completely on renewables because of this huge seasonality that you've mentioned, and this seasonality is not that much driven by climate, but rather by the tourist flows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And there could be so any period when the sun doesn't shine and wind doesn't blow. In Germany, okay, you will just import electricity from the neighboring countries. In
Exactly.
Cyprus, you run your fuel oil fired power plants. That's the only source of electricity. And you cannot run them just 10 days a year because then it will not be economically feasible. So, and here is quite an interesting logical jump. You have to use them more or less in the base load and cut
No,
all
that's
the peaks
exactly what's
in solar
happening.
production.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what's happening in Cyprus now. In Germany, you're right. It doesn't shine. I can increase my coal plant. I can import nuclear energy from France. It's a vast network of electricity, so you have no problem with the power. You can fix it quite easily. Yes, there are some problems, but not like in Cyprus. In Cyprus, it's happening, and why other countries are not doing it. As I said, it's when I was in Okinawa, it was like talking to Cypriots. I need energy at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Our actually high demand is at 6 o'clock when some business start closing down, but everyone's going home. For me to have the energy mix at 6 o'clock, I can only use oil. There is no sun at 6. So in order for me to have that energy, I need to start my conventional engines from 3 o'clock. In order for me to start it from 3 o'clock, it means I have to curtail, so throw away basically 70% of the energy that comes out from photovoltaics. So it's a big problem where you can solve it not only from batteries, pump air in the sea, hydro. You can time your desalination to match production of desalination of clean water when you have too much energy from the sun. You can store it in molten salts. You can combine it with how do I bring electric cars where it will be cheaper if I charge my car when they have too much production from the sun so that my conventional engine can work better. What's the long-term ways I can store it? Is it to produce hydrogen where during the summer, I can produce hydrogen and store that so that I can use it in the winter. So it's a very complex thing. So outside the research and innovation aspect we were discussing, the policy, the energy policy of small islands is so complex that no one is addressing it. In the case of, again, not all islands, about 40% of their energy is transportation. If you electrify all of that, we are not ready for that. Our electricity production cannot double in the next few years to accommodate for the electrification of the transport area. And that's a big, big issue for all islands.
I agree and disagree simultaneously. So I mean,
Okay.
I take all your arguments. This is true, but at the same time, so first of all, this is definitely the case of Cyprus. I live here for 4 years. I have seen how it's working. Energy efficiency. I mean, forget about it. Yeah, no insulation at all. And as far as I remember, in Malta, it was pretty the same, and it's the same in Hawaii. I know for sure. With some energy efficiency measures, the at least the electricity demand from the buildings, it could be limited. At least the growth could be limited or even reduced. With the potential of rooftop solar is enormous, and I think it's utilized only, I mean, less than half, definitely. Most of the buildings do not have a rooftop solar, and this is something because of the permitting process, because the process is not properly organized. In Cyprus, the same in Hawaii. I think I found like the first solar panels in Hawaii maybe like 7 years ago. Yeah, before that, it was also, I was talking to the local people. They were saying that it's very difficult to get permits because, yeah, of the whole regulatory process.
Same situation.
Yeah. So distributed electricity generation, distributed electricity storage, which could be also the case. Yeah, not utility scale, but on the level of the energy communities. So there is a potential how to deal with these issues, but it needs, first of all, a lot of interest and support from the state, from the regulators, to really nurse all these new ideas, which are not that conventional. It's always easier to do what you are used to do than to change the whole regulatory framework and to allow all these strange new things to grow. But then also it requires, I mean, all these people who will install this equipment, a lot of expertise and competences, not that much on R&D level, but rather on the implementation level, which is missing. So what do you think, if we are looking in the future, will small islands be able to overcome all these resource constraints
Mm.
and all these problems and really become the leaders in climate neutrality? Because we know from the climate point of view, the small islands are like the first to suffer, the
Yeah.
smaller, the faster. Yeah. But even here in Cyprus, we start to feel climate change quite clearly, yeah, with all the heat waves and dust storms and water
Mm.
shortages and everything. So we need it, yeah. But do you think there can be some change in this business as usual
Yeah.
order?
The simple answer is yes. It's very easily achievable. You just need the government to push for it and push it hard. For example, we did a small study with electricity consumption in Cyprus. The electricity, regardless of, as you said, new insulations, new LEDs, so all these technological advancements, still the energy was the energy of the households was increasing 2% every year. Because, oh, I'm saving energy because of energy efficient measures. I can waste more energy because I'm used to spending so much money. And only the last 2 years, when we have to pay for the carbon allowance, the carbon credits, only because the electricity increased 30-40%, there was a big drop in the electricity production because you saw a big change. However, the ones that have photovoltaics, because you paid for them and you forget it. So it's a sunk cost. So because you don't pay any electricity, the consumption actually increased 60% if you have photovoltaics. So the psychology of people is very strange. So the government have a hard, it would be hard for the government to convince we want to go to 100% renewable. Technologically, though, it's feasible. For me, the decision is kind of different. A, do you want to import all the technologies from abroad that someone else designed and implemented, and then you just import it? It's very easy. You can import batteries, you can import photovoltaics, you can import hydrogen. It will be very expensive. Or do you want to become a leader in this problem and actually do them here in Cyprus and bring the technology, bring the researchers, bring the innovators, and actually start developing them here in Cyprus and other islands, and then export it so others can copy it to you? That I'm not very optimistic.
Okay, yeah, understandable. Not very optimistic, but I know that nevertheless you are spending all your time on this. So
Oh,
even if you are not optimistic, you are
I'm
doing
still
it.
trying it. I find, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a masochist. I like trying things that might not work out.
But can you also tell about this joint project? And at the end of our conversation, we will show the link to the project that you are engaged in. So,
Yeah,
a few
basically,
words.
all this work was kind of in collaboration with some partners in Malta. It was funded by the European Union. So what kind of discuss today the methodology of how do you engage stakeholders? How do you do the analysis? How do you write an action plan? How do you do the steps in the action plan? How do you identify the stakeholders that need to do anything, the whole process? We did a booklet that other countries, other regions can get this booklet now, and they can actually have, let's say, a blueprint. Okay, this is how I need to identify which countries do I need to study. Which country, I want to become, for example, Sardinia or Crete, let's say Crete, the island of Greece. They want to become a leader in sustainable tourism. That's their overall idea. It doesn't mean they can do it. So this booklet will tell you, how do you identify which other islands or regions to study? How do you identify which stakeholders in Crete do you need to involve and in mainland Greece? And after you do that, how do you design the workshops so that you can bring everyone together and actually realize, do we have research in in this field? Do we have money in this field? Do we have an industry in this field? And then identify what are the barriers? Why haven't we become a leader in sustainable tourism? Why? And what do we need? Resource allocations, what do we involve? And then once you have that, okay, let's put everything, all the numbers down and actually do an action plan. So that was one of the deliverables, if I can call it like that, from our project.
Wow, that's extremely interesting. So, guys, we are already approaching to the end of our conversation, but please stay with us. And when we will finish, don't hesitate to scan QR code and to upload the booklet that Alexandros was telling about, because it's like a concentrated knowledge and takeaways from many efforts, mistakes, and yeah, so it's really a very good summary, and also the methodology algorithm, how to deal, and also a lot of information, which otherwise you will spend ages collecting. As I said, we are approaching to the end of conversation, which was extremely interesting for me. Well, I have a bias. I live in Cyprus, so for me it's especially important. And yeah, we pay a lot of money for electricity every month, especially now in July, August, when air conditioning is becoming the must. You simply cannot survive at 38 degrees Celsius without air conditioning. But to sum up, maybe, a takeaway that you would like our audience to really take away from all our conversation.
I would say that the technology is already out there to solve, maybe not 100%, but at least solve the challenges for the climate neutrality. Even for islands, the important thing is how to bring everyone together and align them and find what's the best case for you. What Germany is doing is not applicable in Cyprus. What Russia is doing is not applicable for Malta. You need to find what kind of technologies you need to bring out that will help you achieve that faster. Otherwise, you just follow what everyone else is doing, and you will catch up 10, 20 years later on, and it will be too expensive by then. It's as you said, in Hawaii, they didn't have a PV until 7 years ago. Why? Why are you not the leader, and why do you need to follow?
Alexandros, thank you so much. And my how to say, my wish to you would be, don't give up. I understand how
I'm
difficult
still
it
too
can
young
be
and
sometimes.
optimistic.
Yeah. So if we as New Energy Advancement Hub can help you, we would be happy to do so. Yeah, and I think for me, the key message, frankly, from all our conversation was about the importance of stakeholder mapping and engagement. As you said, the technologies are all there. It's about bringing people in, convincing them, having them all on board, really engaged and moving all together. So in this respect, I think our conversation was a very small input in this engagement and inspiration. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, you guys, you stay with us, you scan the QR code and follow all our announcements for the next events. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye to everyone.